We turn now to Mark Thompson, the host of the Make It Plain podcast. There's many aspects to this story, and our colleagues here have been covering, of course, what's happening on the ground, and everyone's praying for the best possible outcome. But what does it say in a world where Donald Trump continues to try to define and redefine what's normal, that he proactively, in baseball it would be an error, right? He didn't need to weigh in. He did in a way that was so damaging that whoever at FEMA pressed send on that tweet may have been worried about their job, but I should say at the National Weather Service, but felt they had to do it.
Well, thank you for having me, Ari. And of course, everyone should be praying for all in the path of this, including those in the Bahamas who are being pounded, have been pounded for the past 24 hours. He is totally out of touch with reality. He has made a reputation for himself and has been enabled by just saying whatever comes to the top of his head. No regard for the irresponsibility of his statements. To mention a state being in the path of a hurricane when in fact that state is not, you're absolutely right, would cause a great deal of panic. But he's not presidenting. He's not a real president. And one didn't even have to be a president to decide not to be irresponsible. The National Weather Service, of course, came out and corrected what was said. But, you know, I think you and I talked about this the last time we were here in the studio together. You know, sometimes the mainstream media will amplify what his opponents may do. There's a lot of amplification of Joe Biden's gaffes. But what about Trump's? And this is one that was very, very dangerous and could have really impacted people's lives.
Yeah, and that comes against a backdrop where it all is sort of fodder. The Washington Post has this reporting, again, about how Donald Trump views these situations. Trump administration trying to divert disaster relief funds to border enforcement, which, of course, has prompted an outcry. And then you look at the New York Times reporting on Donald Trump seeing this as kind of a time to be loud but not be accurate. Mr. Trump awaited landfall by assuming the role, the Times writes, of meteorologist-in-chief, adding weatherman-style updates to a usual weekend routine of attacking his enemies, retweeting bits of praise, and critiquing the performance of his cable news allies. I suppose the risk here is that it all becomes mixed up in one soup and tuned out, rather than people who live in Alabama, which, and this would matter regardless, but politically happens to be a state that went heavily for Trump, people there going, wow, I really wish he didn't set off a false alarm here. That's not helpful.
Well, I would hope the people of Alabama, and particularly the voters of Alabama, would take that tack. But I think we all know from time to time people excuse his behavior. And that's just Trump being Trump. That's just what he does. But it's not good for anyone. I also think, you know, it's one thing for him to say it, but it also speaks to his lack of knowledge even about history and geography. He may actually think Alabama is directly on the East Coast. I think we ought to consider that. You know, just as much, we also know this weekend when he was asked about the 80th year commemoration of Hitler's invasion of Poland, he congratulated Poland. So he says these things. I don't even know if he knew what happened 80 years ago. Why would you? That's not something you congratulate. So he clearly does not know anything about any of the topics that he talks about off the cuff.
Well, and
I'm sorry,
Mark, you're putting your finger on it as you often do. We're talking now about the intersection of ignorance and pride.
Right.
It didn't begin with Trump. We have a history with the know-nothing party that proudly wrapped itself in literally, quote, knowing nothing. But you have that now. You have that with people retweeting as if it's all a game, you know, a random citizen in Florida saying things that aren't true, Trump saying things that aren't true, he's the president, and it all being treated as if a game. It's not a game, and a hurricane, if ever there were an illustration to that, as we know from this one and from past ones. Mark Thompson, always appreciate you coming on, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.